Tonight we will be studying a place called Khirbet, Qeiyafa. If you remember from our studies in the past, I did mention it. A khirbet is not like a tell. A tell is like a multi-layered cake that you cut down into, and you get down to ground level, and then you see what you find in each of its progressive letters. A khirbet is different though. A khirbet is right on top of the ground. It had one civilization level, and that was it. And that is what they found for this place we're going to be talking about this evening. We are going to be here in this Davidic layer. In last time, we talked about the end of the Judges through Saul's reign. And for this time, and probably at least one more, we're going to be talking about David's reign. And so we're in the 1,000-year mark. To get to Khirbet Qeiyafa was a little bit of a task. Although it's on the top of a hill, my dad took this picture as we were driving in a tour bus, and the branches are scraping this side, and then on my side of the bus, branches were scraping that side. It was not a road made for tour buses by any means, by any stretch of the imagination. And you can see how skinny that road is going up through there. He was a great bus driver. But then as you got up there, just as a little side light, this right here, this little greeny bush, tree, whatever you want to call it, is where you get pistachios from. It's a pistachio tree. So if you've never seen one before, that's what they look like. So anyways, thought you'd enjoy that. Before we get into the study proper tonight, we need to talk about something we haven't talked about yet. When people read the scriptures, there is a wide variety of what to believe or agree with. Now, if you're in my Bible studies, I think you can pretty much tell. I take the Bible very literally. Now, there are times, and I'm not denying them whatsoever, when the Bible is using simile or different types of language. But the idea is, most of the time, when the Bible says something, it means it. It's a literal meaning. Now, if you stray from that idea and you believe that the Bible is more moral stories, they're not real history, they didn't really happen, but they are parables to make you draw closer to the Lord, to make you a better person. Honestly, the further you get into learning, college, unfortunately seminary, they're called cemeteries for a reason, they usually tend to lead this way. There's a group of people called minimalists, and the reason they're called minimalist is because they take the Bible very minimally. They believe that it is stories for your good and to help, but they're not literal. And when you're talking about King David, it's been a huge problem. The idea that they have is David wasn't a man at all. Because they didn't have any archaeological proof that he existed. And since they can't find it, he must not have been there. Well, it's a terrible argument. It's an awful way to bring out an argument. Well, when they said that he didn't exist, guess what they found? Things for his existence. So they changed it. Okay, well, King David, apparently he was a real person, but he wasn't really a king. There weren't that many kings in this time period. And so he probably didn't really have a kingdom. He was more of a feudal lord. He was a renegade gang leader. Think of maybe like Genghis Khan, having a large contingent of soldiers that went out and pillaged and ruled in that little area. But nothing like a kingdom. Well, the place we're going to study tonight just knocks that right out of the park. And it did it in beautiful fashion, and we're going to talk about that. This is from Khirbet, Qeiyafa, looking down into this beautiful fertile valley. This is called the road to Nazarene, and we will talk about that in a little bit. Over here, there's called, on this far hill right here, there's a town called Azekah that was a Philistine city. This is actually, this right here, and this road was the borderlands between David's kingdom and the kingdom of the Philistines. And this is actually us on that road that I showed you. We are what many people would call Bible thumpers. Because we take the Bible for what it says. And we take it. If it says that David killed a giant, we believe it. If it says that David killed a giant with one smooth stone and then cut his head off, we believe it. That's just the way I am. I would rather have faith in something that's been set in stone, if you want to call it that, for thousands of years, than things that people are looking back on in a distrust of the Word. Now, the place of Khirbet, Qeiyafa, is actually along this hillside here, and it's actually right here, and that's kind of a somewhat roadway that they used when they were working on it. But this is a massive, just straight up cliff, and this is just a small border valley. So this is a picture that I took. This is actually a dry riverbed. The person here is Mike. He goes to my dad's church, and I took a picture of him as he was picking up rocks. What's unique about this place is Khirbet, Qeiyafa overlooks a valley that you may not know by name, but you know the story very well. It's called the Valley of Elah. And we went down to pick up stones because there was another famous person in the Bible, which you could probably already guess, that picked up stones from this same brook. His name was King David, but he wasn't a king at that point. He was just a shepherd boy. The Valley of Elah that I've been talking about, that's here over Mike's right shoulder, is where David killed the Philistine Goliath. And so we're going to be talking about the archaeology that's found around this little valley, which is actually very strategic. Something funny about this creek, though, I meant to pull them out too. I got rocks that I pulled from this little creek, but they don't look very nice and smooth, and they're not really good river rocks. But the reason is, so many tourists come and pull rocks from this little dry creek bed that they had to bring in truckloads of more rocks to fill in. So the rocks that we have are not probably the rocks that were there during David's time. In fact, most likely they're not. But I got them anyway. And I got the closest ones to smooth that I could find. Where David would have probably killed Goliath, you see this hillside right here, it would have been down on this side because the gate to the camp and the city is actually up by that tall tree. So that gives you a little better idea. This is a large overview, and you go through this valley, and actually the Philistine camp is on this side, and Khirbet, Qeiyafa is on that side where the Israelites were, but it's around that road there. Up until the last 43 years, the minimalists have said David didn't exist, or he was something small of a leader. And time again, the Lord has proven them wrong. There's Khirbet, Qeiyafa up on the left, where we're going to talk about, and here is the Valley of Elah. And it would have been somewhere in that area that David and Goliath would have met. This is looking up from above the Valley of Elah. Over to the left is a place called Waco, And here on the right, it's actually much past this arrow, but there's another hillside. On the top of this hill, it's a bald hill. And that's the Philistine town of Azekah. They're actually only like 2 or 3 miles apart. From Khirbet Qeiyafa, which was an Israelite camp, fortified camp, to Azekah, it's very close. I'll show you a picture, but it's extremely close. This, what you see right here, that was the borderland. You didn't cross it. If you went over, you were in enemy territory. And so they had a camp and Israel had a camp, and they were both fortified. Right here, when we read the story of David and Goliath, and you picture in your mind the Philistines encamped on the hillside overlooking the valley, it's going to be right here where they were encamped, okay? And then, of course, the Israelites are right here. You can kind of see some of the fortified walls right there. It was separated by a creek and a road. The road was the road to Sha'araim, and we will talk about that in just a second. This is on top of Khirbet Qeiyafa. You can see our buses, our buses. There's one there and there's one there. So we're relatively close, and that's Azekah, the Philistine city. So, you couldn't throw a stone there, but it wasn't that much far off. You were right next to your enemy. In fact, if you saw your enemy leave their gates, you knew to prepare for war because it was that close. You could see them leaving. Now, from here, this is the Philistine town of Azekah. If you look over this way, you have a bunch of valley, and then you have a little line of white that you could barely see. I zoomed in on it for you and gave you the best picture I could. But this is the town of Ashkelon, which was a Philistine capital. And then right behind it, there's this little dark blue, and that's the Mediterranean Sea. Literally, you can view from Khirbet Qeiyafa, from the top of this mound, all the way across the entire Philistine country. If they left Ashkelon with a decent-sized army, you'd have seen it. So it was a very strategic place. It was one that they wanted to keep. It was the very edge of David's border, all right? Here's Khirbet Qeiyafa, and what they found. It was literally, like I said, right on top of the hill. Before the 1850s, they didn't even worry about it. They didn't even touch it. They just didn't care. Only of all of the places in the world where there are archaeological digs, Israel is by far the biggest. It's all the way across the country. But only 5% of Israel archaeological sites have actually been dug. And so there's massive places that they haven't got there yet. At some point they will, but they just haven't got there. And this was one of them. In the 1850s, there was a Frenchman that said that there was great walls here and that they needed to be searched, but he didn't do it until in 2007, Joseph Garfinkel did the excavation. Here's the one gate, and then the other gate is over here. I'm sorry, I'm twisted around. That's the one gate, that's the other gate. I'll get it yet. But what makes this a very unique city is it is a city of 2 gates. And in our Bibles, it's called Sha'araim, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But they dug for 7 years, and literally what you see right here, a little bit there, a little bit on this side, and a little bit right there, they only did a quarter of the site. And they had so much information, it took them like 10 years to be able to catalog and write out all that they found. And so right now the dig is at a standstill just because they're finally just finishing up what they had dug from 2007 to 2013. This is our group as we come up. You can actually see there's Ashkelon on the back, that back bald hill right there. That's Ashkelon, that's Azekah. And then there's the Mediterranean Sea right there. This is actually pretty cool. You see his shirt? Does that look familiar? It's from the Ark here in Kentucky.
I was going to say Buc-ee's.
I swear.
Yeah. No, that's not Buc-ee's. What's interesting is I went all the way around to Tel Aviv, Israel, to meet a family that lives in Ashland. It was pretty neat. So we were able to talk and stuff. But it was him, his daughter, his wife, and then I don't know where his son's at, but not there. But it was really neat to get the chance to talk to them. But they were from Ashland, of all places, and I meet them on the other side of the world. They were practically neighbors. This is actually the threshold right here. This is the threshold of the gate coming in to the city. They would have had a massive wood door here with a post. This city was built during and after David's time when it was lived in. What they believe is, before this, it was a place where the Israelites would come and stay to protect, and then they built a city on it. Which, I mean, you think about it, if you're going to build a fortified city on your border, you want it to be strategic, and man, the place where it is, when you can see across your enemy's entire country, that's pretty good. When it's got a beautiful valley where you can see your enemies coming from several miles away, it's pretty accurate. But it stands right above where you had previously killed the giant of your enemy. I mean, it kind of reminds everybody, hey, if God did that with me as a youth, he can continue to do it for our nation. And so they built this city. What's amazing is it didn't last for a very long time, and that's probably because it had 2 gates. But beyond that, once it was stopped in use, it was never used again. Once they lost the battle and lost that city, they never went back. And probably because of political issues that you find later on in Solomon and Rehoboam, there was a lot more things that they had to worry about than taking over the Philistines at that point. They found thousands of pottery shards and animal bones, religious objects, scarabs, and at least 2 inscriptions, all dated to the 1000 BC, right at the time of King David. This is the man that actually did the dig. His name is Joseph Garfinkel. And he's known literally around the world. But if you go to ask him a question, he looks you in the face to see you give the question, and then he answers it. And he did it for everybody. It didn't matter who you were. I mean, he was such a humble, friendly, comedic, he was just a really nice guy. And this is him before we go up, and he was showing us pictures of the things that they found. We find this town, its name, in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 52, immediately after David kills Goliath. David cuts off Goliath's head, and the Philistines run for their lives. And it says, they pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and the gates of Ekron, which is quite a ways, I'll show you later. And the wounded Philistines fell along the road at Sha'araim, even as far as the gate of Ekron, Asgath and Ekron. Now, Joshua 15:36 mentions this place, and also 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 31. What's unique about this city and why they know this is it, Sha'arah is the word for gate. Now there's something unique about the Israel language. We have singular and plural. If that's all we have. If you want to say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's all plural. In Hebrew, it's not that way. You have singular, you have a dual word, and then you have plural. So if you want to say something that is 2, it's a dual word. Now, if you add to the end of a word, I-M, it's plural. When you think of angels and you read it in the Bible, it says seraphim, I-M, it's plural. There's a bunch of them. There's a lot of them. More than 1, more than 2. But if you want to say a duel, you say rhyme. Like two things rhyming. It's two. So literally what Sha'araim means, two gates. And like I said, they didn't build them after this one. I think there's one other one that they found. But this one was such a tragic success, failure, whatever you want to call it, that they didn't do it again. And so they know this is it. And it's right on the road. It's right on the borderlands. It's right next to Azekah. It's within sight of Ashkelon, literally over the hill from Gath, from where Goliath was born. Remember I showed you where on that hillside where the Philistines camped? You go right on the other side of that hill, and that's the town, the Philistine town of Gath, where Goliath was born and raised. That's where he was from. And so he comes around the hillside to come after the Israelites. I mean, it was essentially that close, within just a few miles, less than 10. So that's some of the background. Here's us climbing up. Right here in the front, this is a man, his name is Edo. His name is Edo Garfinkel. He was our guide, and he was amazing. He was an encyclopedia worth of information, not just on Israel, but literally all history, world history. He was amazing. And I think it came by him, honestly, because his father is the one that did this dig. His father is the world-renowned Joseph Garfinkel. And so he even said, when we asked him, did you do any digs here? And he's like, oh yeah. He said, oh yeah, I did some digs here. But they were both very, very humble men, both of them, but they were great. You would think when minimalists that don't believe in the Bible would see all of this, that they would say, okay, I'm sorry, we were wrong, but they don't. And it goes as far as I watched a speech by Yosef, and one of the people writing the article said, Khirbet Qeiyafa is so confusing and hard to understand, nobody should talk about it. Instead of saying, yeah, we were wrong and it doesn't fit our timeline, we're sorry. No, nobody should talk about it because it just doesn't match our narrative. Doesn't sound like anything we learned in school, does it? Oh boy, I'll digress. Okay. So, who lived in this little town, fortified city of Sha'araim? Let's look at the evidence. There's 6 different things that we want to cover. Urban planning, cooking habits, administration, writing, geopolitical location, and cultic or God worship activity. And it's not just, the God that we worship, it's all gods. When they say cultic activity, it's not saying that they were a cult, it's just saying that they were worshiping something there. And there's a good question of who lived there, because it is right on the border. We talked about last time that the Philistines, they controlled the land next to the Mediterranean Sea. You come inland from that, and that was the Canaanites. And then the Israelites showed up and started from the west and pushed through the Canaanites into the Philistines. So who lived in this little town? This is on the border of the Canaanites and Philistines, and then it was on the border of Israel. There's one other question that it might be. Beyond Israel, was it also Judean from the tribe of Judah, southern Israel? And we'll talk about that in just a second. So urban planning. Urban planning means it was designed as a city. A lot of original cities were not designed, and you can go into major cities and you can see this. Sometimes they started out small and then they kept building and kept building. And then there's other cities that they put in, all right, this is going to be housing here, so we're going to build roads around it. We're going to we're going to put a bypass in around it. And it's planning, it's organization. It's not just haphazard. Well, what they found in Khirbet, Qeiyafa is it was a designed city, which means there was a government to design it. It was not just a random chance that they built this city over top of it. It has, again, like we've talked about before, casement walls. Instead of building one massively thick, tall wall, they built two walls, built a floor on it, and then built on top of that to save time and effort. And then they would have this gap, and they would use it for storage. People could live there, and then when a battle was coming, everything would be moved out, and they would throw in trash and junk, something that the attackers would have to climb through before they could still get into the city. And it was just another, you remember Jericho, it had two separate walls. It's the same idea. It had public homes, and then it had private homes. The private homes, of course, they were a little further in because you had a little bit more money. This is not found in any other location north of here. As a matter of fact, this is a very Judean form of building a town, urban planning. In other words, it was started with David, and David did it here, and he did it all through southern Israel because that was his kingdom. That's where he did it. And so they also, it's not Philistine either, because the Philistines didn't build this way for this type of planning. So it proves to be a more Judean city. Also, the entrances have 4 chambers. Solomon's, if you remember when we talked about it going up to Hatzor, when Solomon rebuilt, there were 6 chambers in the gate. This one has 4. Well, whatever David did, Solomon wanted to do more grandioso, better, and so instead of having 4 chambers as you come in to get attacked by, you have 6. But, oops, sorry. The next thing that they found was their cooking habits. They found 30 to 40,000 bones. 30 to 40,000, that's a lot. Again, when they lost this city, they just left it. So all the pottery, all the bones, they didn't clean up, they didn't do nothing. It was just, we're getting out of Dodge. Of that 30 to 40,000 bones that they found, there were 3 types of animals. There were sheep, there were goats. You know what the third one was? Cows. Do you know how many pig bones they found in this city? Absolutely 0. Out of 30 to 40,000 bones, to not find a single pig bone in 7 years of digging, covering a quarter of the town, that is an astronomical. What is not found there is very telling.
Yeah.
I listened to another, well, it was Joseph Garfinkel's, he did the dig with him. And he also did a dig of a Philistine city. And he said what they found in the Philistine cities when they've done the archaeology is that when they find the bones, it's up to as high as 33% of the bones that they find are pig bones. Well, you think about our diet. When we go to eat breakfast in the morning, it's going to be a meat. What's it going to be? Bacon, sausage, ham. All that's pig. And that's for us. They found as much as 33% is pig bones in all of these other Philistine towns, but they didn't find a single one there. That's very telling. Also, one other thing that's kind of neat, when they said that they did the archaeology when they did the DNA testing of the pig bones in these Philistine cities, they found that they were all from the Aegean, like Greece and Europe. And the Philistines had migrated these pigs over to the land, which I thought was kind of neat. They'd come a long ways anyways. Oh, and you see this baking tray? These are very unique. They are not found in Canaanite sites, Philistine sites. They're not even found in Israel sites. They are found in Judean sites, southern Israel. So the southern kingdom is where they're found. And so that's also very telling. Administration. they paid taxes with their produce or time stamped. These are all, you see these little indentions? Yeah. Those are fingerprints. And what they would do is they would turn them in with that fingerprint, and if you had one of those jars in your home, they knew you didn't pay your taxes. Is what it was. Kind of neat. You don't find that in Canaanite or Philistine. You only find it in Judean pottery. And so, and you also remember, I mean, when you talk about Solomon, that's the reason Solomon's son lost the kingdom. For one, Solomon taxed the people heavy, but then his son wanted to tax him even more, and that's what lost the kingdom for him. But here's a close-up picture of some of those. That's pretty neat, though. It's a thumb mark. They stamped it so that they could be identified. And, oh, that was the other thing, too. If you had them in your home, either it meant you didn't pay your taxes or you stole them from the government. And that would literally be caught red-handed. Yeah. Twice red. Sorry, that was a bad joke. They also had these stamped handles found in these jars that are unique to Judean as well. Notice how they're pointed at the top and they're pointed at the bottom. They would cut holes in their floor so that these jars would set up straight, and then when they would put them on their carts, they would drill holes in the bottom of their carts and set them there to make it so when they're going down the road, they would set better and they wouldn't lose their cargo. And that was a very Judean design that you don't find in, again, Canaanite or Philistine sites. Also, writing. In 2008, this ostracon was found, and what an ostracon is, it's a piece of pottery that's not used as a jar. It's used as a writing tablet. And in this case, I mean, this is literally, it's a zoomed-in picture of what I took when I was at the Israel Museum, but they wrote it in ink, and you can barely see. I tried zooming in as best I could so you could see the darkness, and you may be able to see it just a little bit. This is very unique writing. It has 5 rows of letters, 5 rows, and in those rows there's 70 letters that are found. It's dated to the time of David as well. It's 15 by 16 in centimeters. It's written in ink. I guess that's just about it. Here, Joseph is trying to describe to us that little tablet that they found with all of its writing. And he said, oh, I wish I had a picture of it, because he had all of his other pictures down here. It was really funny. As he said it, Edo, his son, who was our guide, comes up and just kind of saunters over, and he pulls his shirt tight so you can see that ostracon is right there on his shirt. And it's like, that's all right, Dad, I got you. I mean, that was the face he was giving. It was really cute and funny. Both of them had a really good sense of humor. They were just great guys. But these were the shirts that they got when they were if you were on the dig, and when they found this, you got a shirt that had that engraved on it. Yeah. Anyways, it's one of 4 inscriptions that are only found in Judea the same way. A clay tablet written in ink. You can see that they found it in 2011. Now, it seems like 2011 is a long time ago, but in archaeology, it's not. It's right now. I mean, you can't get any newer information than this, what we have. Not to toot my own horn, it's really not the intention, but what we are talking about in these rabbit trails is literally the cusp of the newest information that they have in biblical archaeology. Now, we're obviously not covering all of it, but what we are covering is some of the newest information that's out there. And the reason it's out there is because it takes a long time. They dug for 7 years on Khirbet Qeiyafa, from 2007 to 2013. I just saw an interview by Joseph, he was talking at a college 4 months ago, It was probably 6 months ago. But anyways, one of the other, 4 to 6 months ago. So, you know, right after COVID. And he was saying they are just finishing up doing all of the detail work after the dig. And again, they're not even done with the dig yet. It was really funny in that interview. He was saying, we have college students come and they do digs, or volunteers that come do digs, and we only dig for a little while. And he says, then you all go home. And when you go home, you know who has to catalog and clarify and do all of the notebook tedious work? Me. He said it was really funny. And of course, you know, English is his second language, so it's not, he doesn't say it very well. But it takes an immense amount of time. And what's really cool about this, when I heard his interview, they didn't have translations on it yet that he was sure about. But I want to give you some that I went and found. I went and did a search by newest articles, and this is what I found. According to Emily, and forgive me for destroying her name, but it looks like puke to me, of the École Biblique et Archeology Française. Whatever. She's French, and her name looks like puke. That's all. She took this little ostracon and she went to translate it. Because once you find it, then you have to categorize it, where you found it, what's on it. You do scanning and all of that, and then you do translation. So this is what she translated. Do not oppress and serve God, despoiled him or her. That's the first line. The judge and the widow wept. He had the power over the resident, alien, and the children. He eliminated them together. The men and the chief's officers have established a king. In the fifth line, he marked 60 servants among the community's habitations and generations. That's what she thought it said. Which, reading it, it doesn't flow very well, doesn't make much sense. But it's what she saw. But see if this next guy sounds any familiar. This is pretty cool. So the next one is from Gershon Galil, from Qeiyafa University in Israel. You shall not do it. And by the way, the parentheses are added for our understanding. Okay, it would be like the italicized when you're reading the King James and New King James. Okay, you shall not do it, but worship the God El, or worship God. Judge the slave and the widow. Judge the orphan and the stranger. Plead for the infant. Plead for the poor and the widow. Rehabilitate the poor at the hands of the king. Protect the poor, the slave, and support the stranger. Does that not sound like the Old Testament law? Leviticus chapter 19, verse 15. It doesn't cover all of them, obviously, but it says, you shall do no injustice in judgment. You shall not do it. You shall not do injustice in judgment. You shall not be partial to the poor, nor honor the person of the mighty. In righteousness, you shall judge your neighbor. What is it? I think it was it James? Pure godly worship is to, I should have put it in my notes.
Pure and unadulterated religion is this, to serve widows and orphans?
Yes, that's the one I was trying to pull out of my head. Yes, that's the idea. Thank you. The idea is, if Gershon Galil is right, what we have written here is a condensed version of the Jewish civil law. Or in other words, how we might say it, it's the judge's cliff notes on the law. This is how you treat the people that live with you. And they found it. It's just really neat. And it is one of a kind. And like I said, there's only 4. This is another piece of pottery that they found. And it has the name Ishbal. Now, Ishbal was a common name during David's time, but 1 Chronicles 8:33 and 1 Chronicles 9:39 quote the same verse, and it says, Ner begot Kish, Kish begot Saul, and Saul begot Jonathan, Malchishua, Aminadab, and Eshbal. Literally pulls his name right out of the jar. Now, later on in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 8, although it says Ishbal here, his name is Ishbosheth in 2 Samuel chapter 2. But it's the same name. It's the same guy. But anyways, it's just really interesting. I mean, his name is right there. This is the wonderful Paleo-Hebrew that I love to study so much and just dig into. They found it in 6 different inscriptions throughout the Canaanite land during this time period, from the 1200 BC to 1000 BC. And we've got a lot that we've talked about in that in the past. Geopolitical location. Again, this is the valley of Elah. It would have literally been right in here where David would have fought Goliath, or, well, David would have fought, Goliath just died. And up here is the top of Khirbet Qeiyafa. This had no value to the Philistines because it was not strategic. They had hills on their side that made a nice wall for protection. There was no reason for them to come across this valley. They may have raised crops or whatever on it, but it was only within reach of their cities to be a political or fortification help to them. And so they didn't have it. And like I said, for Israel, it was perfect because you could see all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. You could see them coming from 20 miles away or 15. And again, I showed you that picture. I showed it last week and I show it now, that is Ascalon and the Mediterranean Sea. This is overlooking the valley, and you can almost tell right here how it really does drop off. It's a great natural fortification for the Israelites. This is actually where my dad found, it was right here, I think. My dad found a piece of pottery, and it was a pretty decent size. It was about like that. And we were walking down back to the buses, and I looked down, and it was right there. And so we picked it up, and he asked Joseph, hey, can I have this? He's like, have it. He didn't want to categorize any more pottery than he'd already done for the last 10 years. By the way, in talking about how I was saying we're on the cusp of the newest archaeology, COVID had a real problem. I mean, it created a real problem because nobody could do digs and nobody could do research. And for literally about 2 years, it's a blank slate. Nobody did anything. And so when we're seeing dates from 2018, 2019, I mean, that might as well have been last year to us because they just didn't do anything, especially in Israel. Here's the socket stone for the gate. Like I mentioned before, they'd have the big wood door, and then a post would sit down in that hole, and that's how it would pivot. Here's the rare second gate that is mentioned, and again, they didn't do it very often because it didn't work out very well for them here. Strategically, it sounded good, but the weakest point in your wall is the gate. It's the only thing that's wood. Would you rather go through solid stone, or you want to burn something out? Well, you set fire to the door and give it some time, and it's going to burn down. Well, if they've got 2 of them, now you've got to split your army between 2 different sides, and it's a whole lot easier to lose. And that's what took place. Again, it's mentioned in Joshua and 1 Samuel and 1 Chronicles, the name of this city. This is Joseph, and he's showing us as he's standing in the door to that encasement wall, and you can kind of see how high it is. And then here, this is where they found that inscription when they were digging, and he's showing us that. This is the valley over here on this right side. This would have been the Philistines' camp. Over this hill, on the far side of that hill, that you can't see, would have been Gath. On the left side here, that would have been the Israel camp. Down this way, on the left-hand side, is a city called Beth-Shemesh, and I'll show it to you in the map. It is a biblical city as well. It's over this way. And Soko is down this way as well, down this path. Here is the road to Sha'araim that they mention in the story of David. There's another picture of Beth-Shemesh and those massive, massive buildings they're putting up. It's just a huge city. This is looking over the hill to Azekah and to Ashkelon. That guy looks familiar, at least from the backside. That's me. I didn't take that picture. This was one, I don't have it in my notes what it is, I apologize. But it was an important site and I forgot to put it in there. Anyways. What? I know. I wish I could remember. Okay, so here's the last thing, cultic activity. They found 6 things that pointed to worship of God somehow. Okay, of some God. Now, what's unique is they found a 4-horned altar, which we just went through the tabernacle. Guess what's there? A 4-horned altar. Notice the horns. They stick up. Okay? They also found these 2. Now, Philistines in that would have had these little encasements, and then they would have put their little gods in there. Little Baals or little Ashtoreths. But these are empty. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then this is also unique. There's 2 or 3, I think, that they found. I think they found 2 of them here in Khirbet, Qeiyafa, and then 1 otherwise. That is called a twin cup libation vessel, which probably doesn't mean anything to any of us. And you look at it and you're like, what in the world is that? What it's cups. This is a cup, and this is a cup. They would fill them up with water, and it's something that's unique to Judaism. Can't do it with a cup of coffee. They would hold their hands out before they go to eat, and it would pour. Notice here's the handle. One person would hold it for the other person who's holding their hands out, and water pours on this hand, and it washes off. When you went to wash your hands before you eat, you remember the religious leaders got onto the disciples for it? What you would do is you would wash down your hands this way, and then you would wash down your hands this way again, and so all the filth would either wash off your elbow or off your fingertips, and that was the idea. And that was one of the devices, even back as far as David's time, which is kind of cool. They found this, though, and this is actually a book that Joseph Garfinkel wrote, and I got a copy of it. What is very unique, they told us on the bus, if anybody would like a copy, Ido, of course it was his son, said, I've got a bunch of copies and I'd be glad to sell them. And so a bunch of us raised our hands. We bought one, and just so happens my dad and I were sitting up close to the front, and mine was signed. It's like, oh, that's cool, Dad. And I said it out loud. Mine's got an autograph. And I saw Ido's face go like that. But I didn't catch on. And then the other people were going through their books like this. Ours isn't signed. Are they supposed to be? And Ido said, well, there was one that was signed apparently. So I got the only autographed copy, which was cool. But I got it. And then what was also funny, there was another time we went to buy a book. And again, my dad and I were sitting like, I don't know, 4th or 5th row up from the bus. And we decided we wanted to buy a book, and we bought it, and sure enough, I opened it up, and that one was signed too, and none of the rest of them were. I don't know how I managed to buy both books that had it autographed, but we gave the other one away, because I had one that was autographed, so we gave it to, actually, that family from Ashland that I mentioned, because they had kids. But if you'd like to look through it, he actually talks about what Solomon's temple looked like from the archaeological finds that they have found. If you wondered what the front of Solomon's temple looked like, that's it. It would have had 2 posts on the side, but notice how it's got pillars up here. These are actually wood pillars that would hold the roof up. That's what it looked like. And it's from this time period of David and Solomon. So that's kind of cool. It's made out of limestone. And this is actually a picture of it with Joseph from the Hebrew University. This is their picture, and it was all broken to pieces, and you can kind of see how they had to glue it back together, but that's it. And that's how big it is, and it was pretty neat. The thing that they didn't find in the cultic worship was fertility goddesses. Ashtoreth was all over the place. All of these gods that look like women in fertility, they didn't find a single one in this city, which is what it's not saying is proof positive. Okay? So those are the 6 things. Who lived there? Man, by the evidence, it sure looks like it was the Judeans, not Israelites, not just any old Israelite. This was southern Judah people. So let's go to the story. And I forgive me if you remember this, because I actually covered this story back in October, so about 6 months ago before I went to Israel. But I didn't have all these cool pictures when I went and looked at it. But I do want to cover this again. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 3. The Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. Now you have that picture in your mind, you can see it. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, the other side of the hill, whose height was 6 cubits and a span, or what we would say 9 foot 9 inches tall. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, or what we would say 125 pounds, which that's pretty heavy. And he had bronze armor on his legs and bronze javelin between his shoulders. And now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. That's 15 pounds. If you threw shot put in high school, that big old ball, that was 12. And his spear was 15. And a shield bearer went before him. To put it into picture, we think 6 foot tall is, I don't know, a little over average of the United States. With that picture in your mind, Goliath is a third taller than what we think of as the normal average guy in the United States. I mean, he was massive. He was just massive. But notice, and this is important, he had a bronze helmet, he had bronze armor, he had a bronze javelin. Bronze, by the way, in the old King James, that's what we would call copper. Let's scoot forward a little bit, verse 12 through 21. David comes into the battle after they've been there for 40 days. When you go to the 40 days in the all through the Bible, I should say, it's very significant. You see a pattern. It's usually talking about trouble or testing, temptation, something. During the flood, how many days did the rain come down? Kind of already gave it to you. 40 days. In the wilderness, how many years were the children of Israel in the wilderness?
40 years.
40 years. 1 year for each day that the spies were in the land spying it out, which was 40 days. On Mount Sinai, Moses went before God twice for 40 days by himself. Elijah went also to Mount Sinai and was without food for 40 days. After he won there at Mount Carmel, he ran away to Mount Sinai. Okay? How long was Jesus in the wilderness being tempted by Satan? 40 days. When, Jonah went to Nineveh, he told them, you have 40 days to repent before Nineveh is destroyed. The idea here, what you keep seeing is the children of Israel are encamped on one hill, the Philistines are encamped on another. Goliath comes out for 40 days during this testing saying, what do you worship? I defy your God. You bring someone out to fight me. It was a time of trial. It was a time of testing. It's, who is your God? Is he powerful enough to save you? And after 40 days of this ringing through their mind every single day, David gets there and finds them completely paralyzed with fear. Verse 22. And David left his supplies in the hands of the supply keeper, ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. Then he talked with them. And there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. And all of the men of Israel, when they saw the man, they fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be to the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, and give him his daughter, and give him his father's exemption from taxes in Israel. Man, wouldn't that be worth it right about now? Give me any Goliath so I don't be paying 5 figures, right? Verses 26 through 30, David keeps asking around, and Eliab, his oldest brother, because of his fear, mocks David, belittles him, because he was ashamed that he couldn't go and fight. Verse 35, David is now talking to Saul. Saul's trying to talk David out of the battle. He says, I went out after it, and I struck it, and I delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose against me, I caught it by its beard, and I struck it, and I killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he's defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. David wasn't talking about his power. Over and over again, he said, the Lord who delivered me from back there, through all of that junk, is going to deliver me today. It doesn't matter who I stand in front. It doesn't matter if it's a lion, if it's a bear, or if it's a giant. God will deliver me. Verse 38, so Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put on a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor, and he tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. Remember, Saul was head and shoulders taller than any man in Israel.
Yeah.
And David's just a young teen. Now you would get from that it's just the size of the armor and the weight, and David's not used to fighting with armor, that David refused it. But it's not. It was prophecy. Everything that Goliath used was bronze. It was copper. Saul's armor was bronze and copper. All right, let's go forward, and then I'll come back to it. Verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook that I showed you the pictures of. And he put them in his shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had. And with his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked down about and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you would come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. And so it was when the Philistine arose and he came and he drew near David to meet him, that David hastened and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. I love that. It doesn't say that David ran towards Goliath. It says he ran towards the army. David had enough faith that I'm going to take you and all the dudes that came with you. He didn't just run towards Goliath. He didn't just run towards Goliath and his armor bearer. He ran towards the entire Philistine army all by himself. It reminds you of the story of Jonathan and his armor bearer when they went up and said, God, if you haven't come up to me, we'll do it. And then they wipe out guys through half an acre all by themselves with one sword amongst them. David ran towards the army. Yes, was it towards Goliath? Yes, but that's not his goal. I'm going to take you and everybody with you. Let's go. Then David put his hand in his bag and he took out a stone and he slung it, and it struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and he stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and he killed him. And he cut off his head with it. By the way, that's a good way to get ahead in the world. Thank you. At least somebody got it, you know. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah, when they arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley of the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Sha'araim that I showed you there, even as far as Gath and Ekron. And just for a map to kind of give you an idea. Okay, here's Soko. This is that Beth Shemesh with those tall, big skyscrapers that are being built. That's way over here. Up here, this is Jebus. This is Jerusalem before it was Jerusalem. This is Bethlehem. Here's Beth Shemesh. Right here's Azekah, that bald hill that I showed you. That's right next to Khirbet Qeiyafa. Here's Soko. And so you would have literally been right in this little spot right here. And it says when they attacked them, that they fled as far as Gath, which was up and around that hill. This is the creek that David would have pulled the rocks out of. Pulled them as far as Gath, but then all the way up here to the gates of Ekron, which that's a long distance to be on foot running for your life. Anyways, they were running in any direction they could get out of there. By the way, like I said, if I was standing here, I took a picture of that town, and you could see the Mediterranean Sea and Ashkelon from right there.
Yeah.
So, and again, like I talked about last week, you can see it's not that much farther to the Dead Sea from there. It's a very short distance. When you go to the Bible and you do a study, the law of first mention is always, it shows high importance. I was doing a study on the armor of God, and I came across the helmet. So I decided to look up the very first place you find helmet in the scriptures. And you know whose helmet it was? It was Goliath's. And when I read that it was a bronze helmet, it clicked with me. When we studied the tabernacle, remember what I said? Everything that was inside the holy place, where only the priests went, that was all gold. And if it wasn't gold, it was covered in gold. It was a beautiful place. Everything outside of that, if it was something metal, like the laver or the altar, it was bronze or it was made of copper. Moses, when he lifted the serpent in the wilderness, it was a copper bronze snake. The picture of bronze, like the altar is, it can go through the fire. It is a thing of judgment. What Goliath was carrying around for protection was his other gods, and they were no protection at all. It was actually judgment on his very soul. Saul, that's what blew me away when I did the study. Saul's armor also was bronze. He was carrying around God's judgment. And when you go to their names, you see why. Goliath's name means exile. Goliath says, I curse you in the name of my gods. Your gods are nothing. He was hoping for protection from the gods, but he was exiled. Saul's name means desired. Remember, the people wanted a king. They desired a king. Saul was going on his own merit to be king. He was taking care of it himself until Goliath came, and then he realized, oh, I can't beat this guy because I don't have God with me. He was doing it on his own ability, his own strength. David's name is beloved, just like the one and only Son. This is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. After you go through your 40 days of testing and temptation, after you've been rocked, your world is rocked, and temptation is beating you overhead, who's still your God? Who's your king? Goliath, well, he had all those other gods. They didn't save him. Saul, he was a god to himself. He was going to do things his way. I didn't save him either. David, if God delivered me back then, he's going to deliver me today. I can go against a lion, a bear. I can go against Goliath and his armor bearer. I can go against the entire Philistine army, and he'll still deliver me. I can be sitting in a boat, and it's still raining. with all these stinky, smelly, noisy animals. Is God really going to save you? Can you imagine? I mean, we don't usually think about it, but 40 days of rain, you literally see the entire world around you engulfed in water, and it's still raining, and it's rained for 39 days. Do you think Satan was leaving Noah alone, the only one left on earth? No. I mean, you and I, we might face a little bit of temptation, but we don't usually get the devil on our back, But man, when you're it, can you imagine how harsh the devil was to poor Noah and his family? After your 40 days, who's God to you? Who's your king? And what armor are you wearing? Are you wearing the hopes and dreams of the other gods of this world? Are you wearing your own? You're going to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. You're just going to do better. You're going to be more powerful. You're going to be a better person. Or are you going to put on the righteousness of Yahweh himself? And put on, like you do your socks and clothes every morning, put on the armor of God for your salvation today. Pretty good questions. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.